Peter, the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is perhaps the most fundamental, deepest, most difficult question that I can conceive of as a pre-teenager. I thought about this and it so scared me, I was literally frightened for weeks. It seems like there's no progress we can make on such a question. Now, what can we say about that?
Well, let's think about it. What would count as an answer to the question? Of course, we can't describe in a way that non-existent things interacting with each other to produce existent things. The non-existent is never going to produce the existent. So it can't be like the questions about why are there living things, which we tell stories about how non-living things interacted to produce living things. It would have to have some other sort of answer if it had an answer at all. Now, one sort of answer that you might give would be that it was impossible for there to be nothing. That there being nothing is actually an impossible state of affairs. And that, of course, would explain why there was something rather than nothing, since the impossible doesn't occur. There have been two attempts at this in the history of philosophy, two attempts that I would describe that way. One is summed up under the name the ontological argument, and the other under the name the cosmological argument. Both those names are due to Kant, although the arguments certainly predate Kant. He was the one that gave them those names. The ontological argument is generally seen as a proof for the existence of God. But it also answers our question because, of course, if God exists, then it's false that nothing exists. If God has to exist, then it's true that it's impossible for there to be nothing. The cosmological argument is also seen as an argument for the existence of God, but it isn't like the cosmological argument in directly showing that the non-existence of God is impossible. It's that if there is a world around it tries to show this, if there is a world around us that looks as this world is, then in the background there mustn't be a being who couldn't fail to exist. But since we see that there is a world around us like this, then we can see that there is in the background a being who couldn't fail to exist. So again, it's impossible for there to be nothing. So in a sense, that argument shows that if there is something, then it's impossible for there to be nothing.
Now, both of those arguments have been subject to severe criticism.
To severe criticism. I don't find either of them convincing myself. I mean, we could go into them if you want, but it seems that the only way that I know of to show that it's impossible for there to be nothing would be to defend one or the other of those arguments. Another way of answering the question, however, would the question, why is there something rather than nothing, would be to show, and there is an argument that tries to show this, that it's vastly improbable for there to be nothing. And there's an argument independently invented, I think, by Robert Nozick and Robin Collins and myself, that's essentially this. You think of all the possible ways that the world might be, and we mean a total possibility for the world, not every detail. All these seem to be equally probable. And the probability of all of them seems to be zero. And yet one of them happened. It may be surprising.
The probability of each individual one.
Each individual one is zero.
Because there's an infinite number.
Think of God throwing a dart at a wall. Each mathematical point on the wall represents a way the world could be, and the dart is infinitely sharp. It hits one, that's the one that is. Well, each one is infinitely improbable, right? The probability of hitting any one point on the wall is zero, even though it got hit. Some people say that zero probability means impossibility, but no, that's not true. It just means, but it's as low as the probability gets. except to raise a rather technical issue, we might conduct this argument in terms of other kinds of probabilities called infinitesimals, but I won't go into that. So 0 is as low as the probability gets, and yet it doesn't represent an impossibility. Now, of all those points on the wall, of all those ways the world might be, how many represent there being nothing? Well, what could differentiate one way for there to be nothing from another way for there to be nothing? There's only one way for there to be nothing, right? It's just that there is nothing at all. There are no variants on that. That's one state of affairs, there being nothing at all. And it's a total state of affairs. That is, it settles everything. Every proposition has its truth value settled, true or false, usually false, by there being nothing. So if we're right that it's one way for the reality to be and always total ways for reality to be are equally probable and it's all 0, then the probability of there being nothing is 0. And that's doing pretty well with the answer. That is, again, imagine throwing the dartboard at the wall. One point out of all the points on the wall represents there being nothing. The dart didn't hit it, let's say. Why is there something rather than nothing? Well, it was possible, but it's as improbable as a thing could be. The probability was 0. Throw the dart at the wall infinite number of times, and the probability of hitting that point is still 0, even in an infinite number of throws. So that does pretty well with the question why there should be something rather than nothing.
Doesn't that assume, though, that a world that has something, all this other infinite numbers, it has the same probability a priori from that nothing does? But doesn't it require some other step? Don't you have to populate those worlds with things that require something extra?
Well, as to what brings the world into existence, that's another question. What makes it real, that's another question. But some world has to be real, even if it's just the world of there being nothing.
But just defining these worlds.
Maybe you could put your question this way. Could there be something that draws the dart toward that world where there's nothing? That there would have to, that's where it would naturally go. That's its natural trajectory, is to there being nothing, unless something explains it's going to one of the worlds where there's something.
Because a world that has something would seem to have something added to it. That there would have to be a second step or a very large number of steps.
Well, that's part of its nature. What makes it that world? That there are zebras in it.
Yeah.
That there are gold rings in it. That there are neutron stars in it. That's just part of its identity. It's which world it is. If these are all, if our diagram displays all the possible ways for reality to be, then reality is going to have to be one of them.
But I'm still troubled by the fact that to equate the probabilities of nothing with any world that is populated with things, there's additional steps you have to make to any one of those other worlds. So to equate any one of those worlds with the world that has nothing in it, I think is false.
Maybe there's a need to distinguish here between a world in the sense of a great big object like a cosmos and a world as a possibility. You remember the worlds I'm just talking about are ways things might be. They're abstractions. Yes. The question is which of those abstractions is realized.
But just to create the abstraction, to define the abstraction, there are many more things you have to do with a world. If you have a world of nothing and then you have a world that has one quark in it, that's another world. That's a something world.
Right.
But to go from a world that you have nothing in it to a one quark world, you have to make a second step.
But remember, the world that has nothing in it, we mean the world that always has nothing in it.
Yes.
Not a world that has nothing in it at some time and then a quark later.
Correct.
So the question, why is there something rather than nothing, must be the question, why is there at any time something rather than nothing? Or why isn't there always nothing?
Correct.
So you have one world in which there's always nothing. So you couldn't have more than one because that doesn't. Yes, if you could have, if it's possible to have nothing sometimes and something other times, then there'll be lots of worlds in which there's nothing sometimes. There's just the one world in which there's nothing always. Why isn't that the actual world? Well, because it's equally probable with all the others, and there's only one of them.
That's where I have my problem. Whether it's, I agree there's only one if it's forever, but I'm not convinced that it's equally probable with any of the other infinite number of worlds.
Well, let's see. What kind of models can we use here? We might, of course, think of the worlds as being represented by some big picture. Look, think of those big pictures of Chairman Mao that they used to have in arenas in China in the 60s, where everybody would hold up either a red card or a white card, and because everything was managed very carefully, suddenly a red picture of Chairman Mao appears. That's one world. Of course, you could hold up the cards and counter-revolutionary saboteurs might have made a picture of Chiang Kai-shek appear. That would be another arrangement. In fact, there would be trillions of arrangements that would count as pictures of Chairman Mao, trillions of arrangements that would count as Chiang Kai-shek or the diagram of a paramecium or anything you like, but only one that counts as nothing. And that's where they come up all white. And that's just as probable as any other arrangement, any given arrangement. Of course, it's much more probable that you'll get Mao than nothing, because there's trillions of arrangements that count as Mao, and only one arrangement that counts as nothing. But each particular arrangement of all the cards, that's an arrangement that's exactly as probable as any other.
Some people would answer this question very glibly and say, God, that there is something because God created it. But when we're asking it, God is part of the something, and God is part of some of the worlds that we're trying to postulate.
Well, either God is a necessary being or he's not a necessary being. If he's a necessary being, then there isn't any possibility of there being nothing. This question sort of prescinds from the existence of a necessary being. It says, well, we don't know how to determine whether it's God or something else. Because for any necessary being, whether it's God or any other, then if there is that, then it's impossible for there to be nothing, and that's the answer to the question. If God is a contingent being, then we still have the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Because one of the possible ways for there to be is there's nothing, not even God. The doctrine of divine creation would just be, well, if God exists, and if anything else exists, that anything else must be because he created it. Then saying, if God is a contingent being, then saying, well, there's something besides God created it. Because God created it, that's just to say, answer the question why there's a physical world or something like that. Not why is there something rather than nothing.
Right. So at the end of the day, what do you feel in your guts to the answer to that question?
I don't know about my gut. I know what I think is the right answer to it. That is, I think God exists and that God is a necessary being, and therefore it's not possible for there to be nothing. But as I say, in this argument that I've just given, I was trying to address people, I was trying to find an argument that might be interesting to people that didn't accept that presupposition.
Let's start by defining nothing, because it's not so simple.
It's not so simple because people are confused about it. Actually, it is pretty simple. To say that there's nothing is to say that there isn't anything. And that's all there is to it. No people, no cats, no earth, no space, no time, no God. Maybe you could allow the existence of abstract things, if you believe in them, like numbers or mathematical objects like that. Maybe the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is the question, why are there concrete things, or maybe not. But at any rate, leaving that aside.
But it's not just a vacuum, because physicists sometimes talk about the universe coming out of nothing because there's a vacuum with quantum foam and particles separate.
That vacuum is a physical object. But even your classical 17th century vacuum, the one that was supposed to be produced when you evacuated a jar, that wasn't nothing because it had extension, it had a size. You can't, a vast emptiness is a vast emptiness. For there to be nothing, if there were really nothing, there wouldn't be points in space that were a certain distance apart. Even a vacuum. If there's really nothing, there isn't even a big vacuum. It's just there isn't anything. For anything that you might mention, there isn't that.
And it is said that this question, if you think this is an ordinary question, you don't understand it.
If you think it's a question like, why are there living things? Or why are there planets? You don't understand it. That's certain. And some people have suggested that they don't understand it in just that way by saying, well, if there were nothing, there wouldn't be anyone around to ask it. Obviously, since we're here to ask the question, there's something. But of course, you could say, too, well, if there were no living things, there wouldn't be anybody to answer the question. Or if there were no planets, we wouldn't be here to answer the question. But nobody supposes that the question why there are planets or why are there living things are illegitimate questions. Nevertheless, you can answer those by appealing to some other things besides living things and planets. If you ask, why is there anything? Well, you can't appeal to anything in addition to anything because there isn't anything in addition to anything. That's what makes it such a difficult question. That's what makes it a non-ordinary question.